guys. Thanks for having me. We're here to talk about the exciting topic of cracks. So who would say that cracks was probably the scariest thing that come across in a home inspection report? Buyers. Yeah. Different types of cracks. Yeah. Yeah. So usually that's what prompts. So I'm a civil engineer. Bear Engineering is an engineering company that specializes in foundation inspections. So whenever, that's usually when we get called in is when home inspection comes up with cracks, whether from a seller or from a buyer. So the goal here is to kind of educate you guys on the different types of cracks, what's serious, what's not, when to loop us in, just more background about it. So we'll jump right in and tell you a little bit more about Bear at the very end. So three main types: horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. Not any one particular type is worse than the others. Sometimes I get people that have looked something up online and they think one type is worse. It's more complex than that. There's a lot of factors involved. So the first one, horizontal cracks. Generally, the only thing that's going to cause a true horizontal crack is the rebar or steel inside the foundation that's rusting. And as it rusts, it expands. It can expand up to 10 times its original size. So that's enough force to crack concrete. A lot of times in the home inspection report, they're not really sure what it is, or there's different theories. But if you have a shallow foundation, which most of our foundations are, there's no other force that will cause a truly horizontal crack. So it shouldn't really be a mystery on what the diagnosis is. If you have a really large retaining wall that's bowing, that could be from soil pressure, water pressure, things like that. But otherwise, the diagnosis here is pretty straightforward. And so then, what you guys care about, what buyers and sellers care about is how serious is it, what's it cost to fix, and how soon do you have to fix it. So I would say in general, most horizontal cracks, it's okay to just disclose that it's there, what the cost is. And it's not something that usually have to get fixed like before you sell the house or before you close on a house. It's something that moves very, very slowly. That's something to realize. It develops over a very long period of time. And it's something you can kind of get to when you get to it versus some sort of immediate stop the sale sort of deal. So there's two different types. There's the early stage, the minor cracking. And then there's more advanced. And I'll show you data in the Bay Area that helps show you what areas are more prone to major versus minor. There's some areas where major is very, very common, and some areas where it's extremely uncommon. Other things that can contributing factors, sometimes they put the rebar too close when they construct it. And so more of a initial construction error. They're supposed to inset it 1.5 inches. They're busting out these houses quick, when they're building these subdivisions, and they miss things like that, and they get the rebar too close. In that case, any sort of rusting will cause it to pop through. So that's kind of the least severe case. Leaking water softeners is a common cause. So water softeners in the garage, over time, they've leaked out. And as they leak, they're putting that water, which has a really high mineral content, into the concrete. And concrete's actually porous. A lot of people don't realize that. Concrete has literally micro pores, and water wicks its way through it. And as it wicks its way through and it finds the rebar, the steel, that's when it kind of goes crazy. Chemicals plus steel really creates that really large amount of cracking. And in the same way, if you have your foundation sitting in really salty soils, which has a high water table, so areas like Fremont, Union City, Foster City, Redwood Shores, that really high salinity content also wicks its way through, hits the rebar, and it kind of goes crazy. And then sometimes if you have leaking on the outside of the house, like a sprinkler system that's leaking, that can be also a contributing factor. So sometimes it's not clear exactly what's caused it, and that's not super crucial that you know the exact cause, because there's multiple contributing factors. The biggest thing though is, is it severe or is it not? So the data I'm going to show you is our proprietary data based on doing right now 7,500 inspections across the Bay Area over the last 6 years. And so the legend here is green is no cracking, yellow is 1 to 10 feet. So the way you assess horizontal cracking is the length of the cracking. So that's one of the main things you want to try to get from the home inspector from observations. It's how long the crack is, because that's going to determine the cost. Orange is up to 40 feet, so that's getting in kind of the moderate category, and then red's over 40 feet. So if you look here at our data, you can see areas like this, Foster City, where pretty much every house has some degree of pretty significant horizontal cracking. So does that mean don't buy in Foster City? No, that's not what it's trying to show, because people still want to live in Foster City because of the school systems, the proximity to work, the ocean, things like that. So it's just kind of creating what a baseline is, what's normal for an area. And so that's where this data really comes in handy. So it can a lot of times help save deals. if somebody realizes, hey, this is very common here, this is what I'm going to get if I go to the next house, I'm probably going to encounter the same thing. So that context on the things we're going to talk about is what's really key. And that's kind of where our value proposition now is with our data. So if you look down here, kind of where we're at, a little bit variable. A lot of the orange, I think, are cases that did have leaking water softeners. Whole lot of yellows. So all the yellows, remember, are just places that are less than 10 feet. So you get buyers and sellers freaking out over horizontal cracking when it's just very limited. It's not an area where it's prone to any sort of widespread cracking. And there's just kind of overreaction to that. And it's just more of a construction flaw, maybe some minor water issues. Very fixable. There's not a lot of areas. There's some random pockets in San Jose with some red, some dark red, but it's very few and far between. It's pretty unlikely you're going to come across that. But when you come up here to Union City, Fremont, Newark, some of these areas, again, a lot of this has a high water table with high salinity content, so you're getting a lot of cracking in those areas. So you know, if we do an on-site inspection, we would go through this, of course. But also, if you have a buyer who can't get a contingency, we now have a service where you can loop us in on Zoom, and through Zoom, we can look at our data, your home inspection report, and get a pretty good sense of how high risk this condition is or not. So that's something to keep in mind. So the basic takeaway is, from a location standpoint, there's only a few really hot areas throughout the Bay Area. So then the question is, what do you do about it? So there's two options, the lesser one and then the more significant one. So the lesser one is a matter of chipping away the damaged concrete to get to the rebar, and then you take the rebar out, and then they put in epoxy coated rebar, and then they patch it back with special mortars. So it's called a spalling repair. Most reinforced concrete structures around the world will have some degree of this done over the years. So it's not like a major repair. It does take chipping away. It usually takes a permit, but it's not that hard to do, right? The cost isn't too extreme. So short distances up to $700 per linear foot. That's why you need to get the length of the crack. So in that case, like a 10-foot crack would be around $7,000. So that's a good kind of budgetary repair cost range for something like that. For longer distances, it can go, you know, as low as $500 per foot. The thing you don't want to do is just cover it with epoxy, because you got to remember, it's always going to grow. The rusting is not going to fully stop, and so you need to get that source out, kind of like getting a cancer out. You need to get that out before, you know, for a full fix. So epoxy covering in that is not an acceptable repair, nor is like a fiberglass sheet. Some contractors are proposing that, but it just pushes the stress somewhere else in there. So you just got to get that rebar out. In some limited cases, you can just grind it down to bare metal and coat it with corrosion inhibitor if it's really minor. So there's also some lesser tiers of it. But that's kind of as simple as that one gets. It's not super hard to do. They could do like a 20-foot section in a day. Pretty straightforward, not anything to like shouldn't be killing deals. And it's not related to movement. We'll talk about movement in a second, but there's no tie between horizontal cracking and movement of the foundation. The more extensive case, so these like extreme cases here where it's just cracked throughout, like the top and the bottom, and eventually the chunks will start to fall off. That's what the term spalling is anything falling off of concrete, little bits and pieces. So like these are the cases where you have to basically replace the top part of the foundation. You don't have to do like a full foundation replacement, but you're essentially doing a stem wall replacement. So they're busting out the top of the stem wall, that's the top of the foundation, putting in new rebar, new anchor bolts, and then they're pouring that together. So obviously a more expensive process, upwards of $1,000 for short distances, $700 per foot for long distances. Again, very, very doable. Usually only those dark red areas that I showed you, usually not something that's fully required. So that's kind of the two cases for horizontal cracking. That's kind of as simple as that gets. Vertical cracking, this is definitely the most common. There's a saying in construction, there's two types of concrete, concrete that's cracked and there's concrete that will crack. So like concrete is prone to cracking, and that's why they put steel in it. The steel rebar gives it this tensile strength that otherwise it doesn't have. And so, you know, the thumb rule for when houses have rebar or not is around 1945. So post-war, most foundations will have the steel in it. Before that, most of them won't. And so you're more prone, in this case, to have more vertical cracks for older foundations, but obviously no horizontal cracks if you don't have any rebar in there for it to crack. So there's pros and cons of that. But you'll see vertical cracks on most foundations. I know sometimes buyers avoid reports just because there's a crack in it, and that's completely wrong. Like it's very rare to find concrete that hasn't had some degree of small cracking. It's then the severity. So I would advise a lot of times for a seller, if it does come up with a horizontal or a vertical crack in the report, loop us in. We can get it independently assessed. We don't do repairs ourselves. We're not trying to sell people on stuff. We're just getting the honest answers, and that a lot of times put buyers' minds at ease. They're like, okay, these people have assessed it. It's not that bad. You kind of get ahead of it, because otherwise their mind is running away from them. They're Googling up cracks. They're going to ChatGPT and they're telling them it could be major structural issues. But a lot of times it's not. It's just seasonal fluctuations. So you got to realize most of the Bay Area is on expansive soil. And so that means it has a high clay content. And so whenever, like, here's the relative size of clay compared to sand. Like, this is clay down here and this is a sand particle. There's like basically microscopic little sheets of ions that have this chemical, electrochemical bond with water. And so it's just really easy once it hits water to swell. So it swells up a lot. And then when it dries, it contracts. And so we have our foundations on expansive soil, for the really wet winters, really dry summers. So it's moving seasonally up and down to different degrees. And so that's enough force then to cause cracks to form. So sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes that net movement up and down comes back to about the same location, and sometimes more concerning settlement results of it. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So it's basically, it could be a sign of nothing, or it could be one indication of something potentially more severe. Just realizing too, though, that like this is where a lot of times people get off, is if the home inspector doesn't find cracks, that doesn't mean the house hasn't settled quite a bit. So I've seen houses that have settled 6 inches with no cracks in the foundation. And that's the reason is because the rebar is doing its job. Like the rebar is in the right location, sufficient amount, and it's just, the house is just kind of tilting, settling, but not cracking. So there's like, cracks are just, that's where the expertise comes in, and the way we diagnose that is what we'll talk about in a second. So anyways, if it's just a normal crack, not from major settlement, a quarter inch, up to a quarter inch, usually a structural epoxy injection. And so they're putting ports and epoxy, and they're injecting the epoxy under pressure. So it's not just smearing epoxy over the surface of it, it's actually getting deep into it. Considered a structural repair, usually around $500 per crack. If it's smaller than an 1/8 inch, you can usually just cover with epoxy because it's too small to take any sort of injection. And you're just trying to limit water, moisture, give a reference point for monitoring. So that would be like a handyman sort of repair. But a structural repair for that, somewhere around $500 per crack. So you can get a kind of rough sense of that. When it starts getting to a little bit scarier category, where it's over a quarter of an inch, it's really noticeable. That's usually a plate and epoxy. So they're adding a steel plate plus the epoxy, and the steel plate's just compensating for generally minimal rebar, just holding it together better, helping extend the life of the foundation, making it perform better in earthquakes. So around $1,000 per crack for that. When it starts getting really large, like displacing in and out and up and down, usually in that case, closer to $3,000 to like $2,000 to $3,000, and you put a underpinning pad to support it. These are usually on really old foundations. At some point, though, it makes sense to potentially replace a section of the foundation as well. Just realize if the cracks start getting a lot bigger, the cost can go up a bit. So that's vertical cracks. Then the last, which is what I would say, it could potentially be the worst if it's a significant condition, would be diagonal cracks. So related to settlement. And so we'll talk about different areas, different hotspots throughout the Bay Area, and what's normal in different areas. So some of the things you're looking for this is a sign of differential movement. So if a house settles, it generally doesn't settle uniformly like in one direction. There's one part that is a little bit more than others. Part of it's because there's more moisture on the outside of the house than on the inside. And so it just moves differentially, and that's what causes these diagonal cracks. And so you'll see it in the foundation, you'll see it inside the walls, ceilings and walls. In extreme cases, sloping floors and baseboard gaps and sticking doors. So these are all the possible indications, you guys are probably used to kind of looking for when you go through houses. And it's not the case where every single type of diagonal crack indicates a major issue. That's where we then come in to get the data. You're basically measuring the surface of the floor and taking elevation readings. And from that, you get basically like a contour map of how much settlement is present in the house. So that's kind of the end answer to jump ahead. Like if you have cracks, you're not certain how severe they are, this is how we diagnose it. So we'll go to our data here. So this is data for settlement, and we've color coded it by severity. So here's the color scheme right here. Red's the worst, green's the best. So we'll just pick on, like, say, Willow Glen. So you can see here when you pull back, all kinds of red, really common settlement. But what this, again, also does is put it in context. So if someone's really interested in a Willow Glen house and it's uneven, well, like most of them are uneven to differing degrees. So it's putting that within context of what's normal for the area. Like, it's very rare that any of this is truly structural in nature, that the house is unsafe. That's usually what people want to get to at first is this house unsafe or not? It's extremely rare for that to be the case. So next here is what's normal for the area, and how does this fall into what's normal for that region. And so that's one area, and then you can contrast that with, say, this area through here, parts of Saratoga. There's lots of variations, but you see areas where it's basically all green and all yellow. And so from that, again, like if you have a buyer who can't get us on site, we can look at our data plus your observations, and that's where we'll talk to agents like how does this house feel? Like most agents that's walked through thousands of houses can say, yes, this house is definitely uneven, or this house feels really quite even. So that's something you're also trying to get to take note of when you're out throughout the house, plus looking for signs of all the things we looked for, all those other indications. So you really want to keep an open eye out for that, because the reality of it right now, as you guys know, for buyers, it's really hard to get somebody like us on site. The seller will say, no, I don't want any more inspections. So you're trying to piece together as much as you can on your observations, plus this data will a lot of times get the buyer to a point that they feel comfortable, with taking action on it. So then the next thing, and I've only got a few more minutes here, and we can always come back and go through more detail, is, what do you do when it's more severe? So say you have settlement that is to the point that something might need to be done in the future. So in this case, this is a good illustration showing like a floor survey, an area that moves more than the rest, such that something might need to be done. So in this case, let's say a corner of a house, the way you stabilize it is through underpinning. So basically what you're doing is skipping down through the bad soil and hitting rock down deep. And the rock can be anywhere from like 30 to 60 to 80 feet deep, so quite deep. So you can't really dig down to it. So what they're doing is pushing piers using hydraulics and the weight of the house to push steel piers down to the bedrock, or installing helical anchors, which are like giant corkscrews that they're twisting into the ground, or drilled piers. There's a couple methods. The exact method doesn't really matter at this point, but the bottom line is you're skipping down deeper, and that's an inherently expensive process. So around $3,000 to $4,000 per anchor, and they go every 6 feet. So a house like this with five locations, that would put it at like the $15,000 to $20,000 range. So it's like, a general kind of high level, thumb rule for like a corner of a house. This is a flat lot house. So if you have a house with one corner of it, that's a rough range. And then you can kind of extrapolate that out to different sizes of the house. The number that we're generally looking for it to be in that minor category is the 1 inch and 20 feet thumb rule. It's not set in stone, but it's kind of a thumb rule. So in this case, if you had a 40 feet wide house, the 1 inch and 20 feet would equate to 2 inches. So something beyond 2 inches is outside that range of a starting discussion point. If you had a 60 foot long house, it's 3 inches. So it takes into consideration the length of the house. So those are all the things we're looking at to tell what's severe, what's not, what needs action, what doesn't. One of the key things with this, though, too, that we reinforce to buyers is that, like, all of this is fixable. Like all these conditions are solvable. It may not be super cheap. It may not be super expensive either, but that's where you just want an independent assessment. You generally don't want a repair contractor looking at that, because a lot of times they look through it from the lens of, I'm going to make money on this job eventually, right? And that's not the goal here. The goal is just to get it independently assessed. So that's one thing I would definitely try to stress, is get an independent assessment, not something that's going to profit from the repairs related to it. So that's kind of the general overview. I know we're kind of short on time. I'll leave a little bit of time for questions, and happy to come back. There's so many things to go into, the root causes of movement, things like that. But that kind of gives you an overview of the different cracks.
There was a Willow Glen like it was a townhouse and unit, and they had $60,000 in repairs. If they had that done, how likely is it that they would have to revisit it if another unit next to it? It's like,
yeah, like townhouses can be tricky, because really to do a design, you need to assess both of them if they're connected together. because if you stop one from moving, the other is still dragging on it. That's putting a lot of stress on the other unit. So in general, you'd want to assess the other side. You could stabilize that side pretty well. You just run some risk that the other side continues to move. But it's a permanent fix. That side should be mostly fine, but like where they're connected might pull apart more so than before. So.
Questions online? Just unmute yourself. If you have a question online, feel free to unmute yourself. Sri, what do you got?
Nathan, thank you for all the presentation. It really is helpful because a lot of first-time homebuyers in the Bay Area have these questions. What you explained. My question here is: you said you're gonna do the Zoom calls, is what you said, right? Sorry, I missed on that part. When we have any consultation needed.
Yeah. Maybe going through just kind of like the different services you have and how we can use you guys, right?
Yeah, for sure. So the remote consult on our website, you can click on your buyer without contingency. It's $199 for 30 minutes. We'll look at the home inspection report, your occupations, take as many pictures as you can, plus our data. You just schedule on a time on our calendar.
Okay.
And we have a lot of availability in the evenings to come and do that. So pretty straightforward. It's not the ideal is to get on site, but it's just not the nature of the game right now. So
Okay.
yeah, that's the way you do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm one of them. So I'm the founder and owner, and I have 6 other inspectors that are out there doing it.
So you go out to the property, assess the situation, and then provide a consultation after that, or you just consulting on the engineering side?
So this remote service is an additional one beyond what's kind of normal for a foundation inspection. The normal foundation inspection, when you can get us on site, is the on-site inspection. And then we review it on site. We produce the report, kind of straightforward, like a deluxe home inspection.
Yeah.
And then if you can't get us on site, just because of the speed of the market and the no contingency world, that's where the remote comes in.
Yeah.
I guess the common question that we always get when there's foundation issues on the reports, so I'm assuming the way it works is we look at the reports. There's the inspector never really says if there's, but we should look into it.
Yeah.
That's the foundation report.
Yeah.
We give you a call, you come out, you inspect it, you kind of do further push that along. Is that right?
Yeah. So like, especially if you had a seller, you wanted to get ahead of it, you would book it online. Here, our pricing is right here, starts at $850. We would do our report. We would put it on the context and give you the report. If you're working with a buyer who's interested in a house, gets a home inspection report, but they can't get us on site because if they forced a contingency, they're going to lose the house, just guaranteed. Then that's where the remote consultation comes in.
Yeah. I've used them handful of times in the past, guys, and it's like a really detailed report that you guys do when you're able to come out for the on-site inspection. And it's peace of mind as well, right? So my clients I think you guys did a property for me downtown, really old foundation, and it laid out like all these different options if they wanted to preserve the foundation, replace it eventually. So it gave my buyers a whole picture of like 5, 10, 15 years down the road of what they needed to do.
Yeah, we have a lot of pictures because it helps to explain it with pictures. We give options. There's usually different tiers of what they may or may not want to do, and it's not biased towards a higher dollar amount to profit. So.
Yeah, it was really, really informative. Veena, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. Really useful. So I want to ask, is there a general rule of thumb, like if a house is a certain years old, like before 1970, 60, 50, whatever, that we should go for a foundation inspection? Would you say that, or is it only with visible defects you decide that it is better to go with the inspection?
So the biggest factor that would drive the need to have more caution is the age. When you start getting into houses that are over 100 years old, that our data here shows this is major chemical spalling where the concrete's breaking down, with about a 20% chance of that. So if it's the concrete's breaking down, there's nothing to fix. That's a guaranteed foundation replacement. So it's that age that really triggers it at that like kind of 100-year range where you might be in that category. So that's where extra caution should come into play. Relative to movement, this is not really a function of age. If except if you buy something a few years old, there's very unlikely that it's going to have any major settlement yet. But the movement here is more of a function of the soils below it and not so much the age. So I would say that's the two cutoffs, is like around 100 years to definitely start being aware of that. Because the foundation replacement could be, you know, $200,000. That's a big deal, you know, for a decent sized house, anywhere from like 150 to 200. And so that's the one you really want to make sure your client doesn't buy into, where the home inspector might have missed it or didn't stress it enough, and then they're quite upset at the end of that point.
Got it. So anything 100 years or more, like that's when really the age is the factor. And then other than that, it's like the area and the soil, right?
And the soils, and that's where our map comes into play, where we can kind of give you a sense of what's normal for the area. It's more of soil. The movement's more soil related than age related.
Excellent. Any other questions, guys?
Whenever we are showing and if we come across any kind of horizontal, vertical or diagonal cracks on the foundation, we tell our buyers like it's a big ticketed item, even before we see the inspection or anything. So should we go and ask a mirror company to do the inspection before we say not to buy this house?
I mean, he just said a lot of times agents make it sound worse than it is, right? Because some agents don't know what they're talking about, right? And so by just saying it's a big ticket item, I don't think that's accurate, right? I would say, hey, this is something you can look into. It could be as simple as one of the fixes he said, right? I wouldn't just blanket statement, hey, this is a big ticket item, right?
Yeah, I think the majority of the cost you've given to me is actually an eye opener for me. It's actually less than what I thought.
It is, yeah, it really is. I think there's a lot of cases where they've seen quotes from contractors that are just over the top, trying to sell things, you know, or they're searching online and their mind's running wild. Just like you Google symptom, and you think the worst thing, disease in the world, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's over exaggerated. Every now and then it's not, right? But in that case, usually if it's that bad, you probably want to have that known in the process somewhere and not come up later when somebody's really upset about what they're experiencing and seeing.
Do you have a cheat sheet or anything that you can give us that has like some of those prices, or is that on your website anywhere?
Yes, we have, like if you go to our educational page,
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of good education on here.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then down at the bottom, this is where we also have the lectures we're going through. So you can go through this presentation's online too.
Oh, okay, perfect. Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, because people just get scared when they hear foundations. Like they immediately get scared, and it's like, well, it's not. It just depends, right?
It just depends.
Yeah.
And we have, like I said, it's just not me. We have large capacity, so we try to get people out there as quickly as possible. We know that real estate moves fast, and you just can't take weeks to get out there. So we try to get out there within a couple of days. Report can be done the same day as well.
Got it. So quickest method, if we have a buyer that's either short on time, is just book one of those Zoom calls with you, right? Sounds like it.
Yeah, if you, a lot of it is like a buyer's got to make a decision in a couple of days. The house just came on the market, they like it, but too many offers to do a contingency. The Zoom we've done about 1,000 of these now. It's can be very helpful to get a sense, right? You can't tell you exactly because we're not there.
Yeah.
But we can give you a sense of the relative risk, because otherwise you can keep missing houses, and that's also frustrating for you as agents, right? They're like keep chasing houses and missing everything.
Yeah.
So, at some point you just gotta get to see how risky it really is. There's not like a perfect. I guess I would finish with this, or like there's not really a perfect house in the Bay Area, or it's pretty rare, right? There's something like. If it's not the movement, it could be the horizontal cracking, or in this case, groundwater. There's another function there. So there's lots of things. Just a very complex area. So just putting everything into relative to what other houses are. That's the best way.
And so, so when they book the call, I mean, could they put pictures of the foundation and send that with you during the call?
Yeah. The more
Is that helpful?
Yeah, for the more extent you get, like especially if there's a cellar, like usually people don't want to crawl through the crawl space per se, but like the more pictures you have, the better. Either inside the house. Sometimes people walk me around inside on a Zoom, so you can show me the cracks. The home inspection report's informative, depending on the quality of that. You just kind of piecing together all the things you can. But in any case, the more information, the better for sure.
Cool. All right, guys. Any other questions, guys, before we wrap up? All right, let's give a round of applause, guys. Good stuff. All right,
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you. see where we at. So guys, this concludes our meeting for today. If you guys need anything, please let us know. But one more time, let's clap it up for everybody getting after it this week. See you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrique.